Dr. Weiser, members of the board, thank you very much for the opportunity to study life coaching with the Life Catalyst Institute. I have to say that I find the course extremely helpful and useful, and feel prepared now to go out and sell my life coaching skills, and also to use them in my everyday life, and as in the nonprofit that my wife and I are starting up. So again, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I think one of the best metaphors to describe life coaching is a catalyst. A catalyst is a chemical or a substance, when added to a chemical reaction, improves the efficiency of that reaction. It helps it go faster and uses less energy. The great thing about that, and how it applies, I think, to life coaching too, is that reaction that substance catalyzes would go off by itself. It would continue by itself without help from anything eventually. The catalyst just makes it more efficient. It makes it faster. It helps, in some cases in biology, it might even help organize or orient molecules so that they're in a position to react more frequently. But I think it's an important metaphor, and I think as going forward, it's something that I try to think of whenever I'm talking to someone. I've got some clients now, that when I'm talking to them, that I'm thinking I'm not here to get involved in their lives per se. Right? I'm here to be a catalyst. They're the ones that have to do this work. And I think that's what separates life coaching from therapy and counseling. Therapy and counseling are much more hands-on. I think it's more intrusive. If you look at it, the therapist and counselor usually goes back. They have to go back into the past and deal with things that the client had done, or things that have happened to that client a long time ago, or sometime in the past. And so they have to go back and have that person usually deal with those issues, to frame and reframe things that happened back in the past. In life coaching, it deals with the present. A life coach doesn't necessarily care what it is that goes on in the past. We care what's going on in the present. What are the person's beliefs now? How do they see their world? How do they interpret the things that they experience? Those are what are important to us as life coaches. Also, a therapist or a counselor will actually do the treatment plan. They will go and create the treatment plan on their own and present that to the client. In life coaching, 75% of the action plan, which is analogous to the treatment plan, is done by the client themselves. And so that's the main difference. It's client-driven. And because it is a client-centered process, it's very important that the client be committed to change. And that commitment can be summed up in the 3 R's. One is they need to recognize that they need to change. This usually comes in the form of saying things to themselves or to others that I ought to stop looking at porn on the internet, or I need to find a new career. But that need or the feel that they want isn't quite enough yet to drive them to the point to take those first steps. The next R is ready. They need to be, when they're ready, they actually begin to take those first steps to begin the process of changing. That may be reading self-help books. That may be actually sitting down and giving a lot of thought to what their issues are and planning things out themselves. Or it may be that they reach out for someone like a life coach to help them through that process. And the 4th R is relationship. They seek out that relationship to get some help, to help them think through their goals, to help them formulate their action plan, and to get some help to stay on it, to do the things that are necessary to achieve the goals that they have. That relationship can be referred to as mentoring. I have a couple of clients now, as I said, and One of them, we spent about 6 weeks together and created the goals and an action plan, and he went through them very quickly. So I said, we're just about ready to wrap up. And he says, no, I want to keep these conversations going. And then what he's doing is I think he's looking for a mentor to help stay with him. I think one of the most obvious attributes of a mentor, and one of the most important, is that a mentor cares. A mentor stays in touch. They care about how the person grows and what they learn. They give constructive feedback, and they receive feedback well, and they're not judgmental. They listen more and talk less. They provide guidance. They create a positive counseling environment. They avoid checking up. They offer constructive criticism and share their own thoughts. They assign homework. And they keep their eyes open for opportunities that could be beneficial to their client. Honesty is important. And the mentor and the mentee, or the life coach and the client, they should make sure that they have clear roles. They should communicate regularly. They should hold each other accountable for the things that they've talked about and agreed on during the meetings. They should set an agenda, and they should be important. They should avoid canceling at all costs. Building a coaching practice is like building any other business. You need a name, and something that can be a handle for you. You need business cards, brochure, maybe a website, stationery, an advertisement that spells out what it is that you do. And you don't want to leave out social media in this case. I think LinkedIn is a wonderful resource for a person that is reaching out and starting out in business. You can get a lot of contacts. You can display any of your skills in terms of writing, like a blog, and it can help you reach out and find new clients. With advertising, of course, there's no advertising as good as word of mouth. So as you're practicing, you'll want to guard your reputation for being honest and forthright and helpful, because that will precede you. That will be your biggest advertising asset that you can have. You might want to design a booth for conferences where you can have some brochure and you can be there and you can talk to people that might be interested. And you're going to want to develop a sales pitch. Sales pitch can be fairly easy to do. The hardest part is the last, which is closing it and learning how to say, hey, can you sign up? Would you like to engage me for this contract? Life coaching is essentially identifying and overcoming obstacles. So the process then is to actually assess what the client's current state is, things that are important to them in their lives, and what their future state, what they want that to be. What future state is it that they want? Okay, and you can assess those using the tools that come in the kit with the life coaching. Essentially, this comes to a gap analysis, because you look at these two states and you see what's in between, and then through the assessment, try identify what all the obstacles are. And there's a lot of obstacles that can get in the way between a person moving from a current state to the future state that they want to be. Of course, one is no clear vision. One of those obstacles. It's not being able to see the end and not being able to look. Maybe what they are is more based on being able to identify what they don't want rather than what they do want. So they're more negative oriented. They can only identify the future by saying, hey, I don't want that. I don't want a marriage like my parents, or I don't want to end up like A-Rod, or something like that, rather than, gee, I would like to be a writer. I want to be a professional writer. I want to be I want to publish music. A big difference between the two. Maybe the outcomes are just obscured. There's just not a belief that they can achieve those. Right? Other people have success like that, not me. Maybe they put themselves last, meaning that in my experience, a lot of people who do this are people pleasers, where they want to go out and help other people, not because the helping them is going to benefit that person in any way, but because they're going to get that person will like them, or they believe that that person will like them because they did it. Age barriers are one, and today I think this is really prominent. It's prominent because age is being redefined as we go, as I get older. I mean, I hear the phrase all the time, hey, 60 is the new 45 or the new 50 today, or even less. And I have to agree. When I'm 60 years old, and I trained for triathlons. I raced triathlons. And I'm in better shape now, physically. I can run farther, bike faster, and swim faster than I could when I was 30 years old. And I remember I was at the health club the other day, and there was this video, a 70s exercise video for the elderly, 60 and over, right? Because that's what we called elderly then. And the exercise consisted of, a woman was sitting there in an exercise tights on a chair, and she was just scooching forward, to rhythm, scooching forward, scooching to the left, scooching to the right, scooching back. And that was it. But I remember at that time, people at 45 were old, right? So I think age barriers are a big one coming, especially with the baby boomers coming of age. Financial problems are always big. Again, people spend money sometimes as a drug. Right? They spend money to help feel better, or to make themselves feel empowered, or to keep up with their neighbors. Marriage problems are a big thing, and even in my very short practice, had a woman with who didn't come to me for marriage problems, came for career help, and after we had got through that, I found out that she had big marriage problems, huge. In fact, she couldn't get a job because her husband would be jealous that she'd make more money than him. That's why she didn't want to discuss it. The marriage problem, because it was too painful. There's the ship coming in of madness. I know people who really say, hey, you know what, we'll get in debt now, it's okay, we'll win the lottery later. They do. And family commitments. Met a man the other day who put his life on hold for 5 years because he had to stay and help run a little grocery store until his parents could retire. And basically had to put his whole life on hold until that was done. And didn't see that he could still go on anyway. It affected him in such a way that he couldn't spend some time on himself. He didn't assert himself in a way that he could be able to do that. There's time, right? Time management's a big problem with people who spend time like they spend money. I got a lot now, so I seem to have a lot of time, so let's waste it. There's maybe being hooked on adrenaline, being maybe addicted to adrenaline or action sports. People have to spend a lot of money on parachuting and things like that. Being taken advantage of, people who rebel. Had a cousin who had oppositional defiant disorder. I think that's what it's called. I probably should have looked that up. But everything you'd say to him, he'd have to go against it. Anger, grief, other addictions, depression, these are all obstacles that can come up while the assessment is going on. Once all the obstacles are known, then you want to come up with an action plan. And fortunately, with this life coaching certificate comes the Life Catalyst curriculum, which is extremely useful and informative about what these obstacles are and how to get around them. One way of doing the gap analysis is to use the I can do method. Basically, the I can do method is that the client will go ahead and chart in a table how they spend their time and how much time they spend on it, and what they want for that thing they're spending their time on, what they would want that to look like in the future. So they would actually go and map that out for a period of time, and then that gives the life coach and the client some good hard data material to look at to help assess those current situation and what the future state would be, and to help define that list of obstacles. I can do is basically just stands for this. I stands for investigate. C stands for current situation. A stands for the aims in life. N for the number of alternative solutions to achieving those aims, which is really important. Just take a second here. The more possible solutions or alternatives or choices that a person has, the higher the chance of success. So that's real important. And of course, also the date that you want to achieve the end state, and what the outcome indicators are. You really can't tell if you're a success or not unless you can actually go and look at the results and to say, yes, this goal was met, this obstacle was removed, we achieved, we are at our current state. For just about every obstacle that is discovered during this process, there's material in the Life Catalyst curriculum. It's an extensive library on topics from subjects like attitude, the importance of attitude, of desire, down to anger and self-destructive behavior, which is one of my favorites, and depression and character and habit, and issues with the family and children. There's stress management and time management. So all of this material is available in the curriculum to provide a basis, the basic knowledge about these obstacles and how to get over them. So no matter what you run into, you have some material that you can go back to help conquer those obstacles. So far, I have talked about what I think is the easiest part of life coaching, the basic structure of it, the outline, the doing assessments, the material for helping to overcome obstacles. What I want to talk about next is what I think is the very hard part about it, and that is getting an accurate picture of what those needs are, being able to communicate effectively with a client so that the best possible plan can be devised. And this stems around, I think, basic understandings of life, the way people grow up, where they come from, the cultures that they live in, all the way down to an individual culture within an individual family. Because it's those very things that form our beliefs. From the time that we are born until the time that we are born until the time that we die, everything that we touch, taste, smell, see, hear, comes into our system. And when we're very young, even younger before we can even remember, this information is imprinted in our brains. It's stuff that we learn. How we interact with the world, our interactions with it, the events that happen to us, the way that people interact with us, our neighbors and our families, all contribute to some very basic beliefs about ourselves, about our world, about family. And when we're talking about life coaching, that affects how people define such things as family and security and happiness and success. All of these things are defined based on our beliefs that begin to form when we're born. And they start to form at such an early age that the beliefs that we have when I'm 50 become absolute fact, dogma almost in my mind, because I don't remember learning them. That's just the truth. That's just the way things are. And so when we're working with someone as a life coach, those beliefs, that knowledge are going to color and affect the way that they communicate and the way that they define words such as, family, respect, happiness, and success. And I think that's one of the most difficult jobs as a life coach, is to try to get an accurate as possible picture of what the client means when they say those things. What is success? What is marriage? What is happiness? What is family? I'd like to just give a small illustration that kind of magnifies that point a little bit. I was in the Peace Corps in the 1980s in Africa. And I learned a great deal about this kind of thing, about the differences from what people, how people view such very simple concepts. But for this instance, I'm going to talk about a man that I knew who, an American man, a Peace Corps volunteer, and I'm just going to call him John. John had a very, I would say, normal life here in America. He was born into a nuclear family with a father who had a very good job and a mother who stayed home. Excuse me. They went to church. He had a sister who was older than him by a couple of years. They grew up to be very close. He had good relationships with his parents. He lived a very nurtured and sheltered life in an upper middle class neighborhood. As he went through school, he did very well, and then graduated from college and began to know. He had a very good background, and so he understood that his life was different than a lot of people's that he met in some cases, and that he was privileged in a way. With the special life that he had, with the relationships that he had with his parents and his family. So he wanted to give back, and so he joined the Peace Corps. When he got to Africa, John got to Africa, he met an African woman named Alima, and they got married. But Alima's background was very different. Alima belonged to a rather large extended family that all lived in a couple, maybe two mud and wooden houses with thatch roofs, not too far from a small town. There might have been 3 or 4 generations living in that house. His mother and father had been married for a long time, but the father was a government, drove truck for the government, collected a very meager paycheck, and there was never any fuel for the truck, so he essentially sat under a mango tree drinking all day and supplying sperm to the mother. So he was essentially a drone. The mother of the house, she ran everything. Right? She ran a little bar there. It was called Pito. It was this millet drink that she brewed, and her daughters and sons would all serve this drink to customers who would come and sit under the same mango tree that her husband sat under. She also sold oranges from a small grove there, a small orange grove near their little compound. And she sewed. She had a sewing machine, and she sewed and fixed and repaired clothes and made new ones that she sold in the market. And so 3 days a week or twice a week, she would go to different market days around. Well, when she was pregnant with Alima, she was very pregnant. She was walking, carrying, her oranges on her head and some cloth that she wanted to sell. Being very pregnant, she had to walk the 5 miles to get to the town's market when her water broke. And Alima was born there on the trail. So she pulled Alima out, took her back to the compound where Alima's grandmother helped her mother clean her up. They fed her there, and then Alima's mother strapped her to her back, and they went to the village to finish the day's selling. Alima, when she grew up at 2 years old, was old enough to walk and talk. She was selling in the market. She carried a little box of oranges on her head around to people walking and selling them for a couple pennies. And she would gather firewood and get water as she grew and got stronger. So she had a very strong work ethic that came from very young in age. And she accepted the fact that her father was a drone and that her mother ran the entire household, along with her grandmother and some aunts and all of these people that were together. Now, this is fine. Differences are fine in marriage. And when John and Alima got married, they lived for a couple of years in Africa. And their main concerns were very low on the Maslow hierarchy. It was a very bad time for Ghana in the 80s. I was there. I can attest to that. There was no electricity was very inconsistent, if at all. There were no telephones. The roads were horrendous. And, of course, the economy was completely out of control. So Alima and John would get up every day, and their main concerns were to find food and water and fuel. That is what they did every single day. The fuel was for cooking, of course. And they needed the water. And all they had was a 5-gallon jerry can and a little clay pot. So they would split up. He would take the jerry can, go look for water. She would take the clay pot. And they'd go in another direction, and they would come back a few hours later, hopefully with some water. During the rainy season, a little different. They had a 50-gallon drum with a rain catchment system on a tin roof that was on their bungalow they lived in. There was no refrigeration, so food was pretty much bought fresh every couple of days. You really couldn't keep it around because of the flies and the heat. So they got along fabulously. Right? They were in love. They cooperated very well in this kind of thing, but they just weren't prepared for when they went back to the States when his service was over. When they were in Africa, their concerns were food, fuel. It's hard to argue about that. No matter what language you have, especially if you're living in a harsh environment, it's very hard to argue about what food means and what fuel means. But when they got back to the States, all of a sudden that wasn't a concern anymore. What was a concern was family, security, relationship, finances. And you can imagine the differences of how they would define those terms. One of the biggest things they had is she wouldn't share any of the finances with him because men are drones. That's what she believed. That was a belief of hers. So she wasn't about to share any of the money she made. She looked at them as independent partners when it came to finances. He came from a nuclear family and thought that everything should be shared. She looked at him more as a sperm donor. There was very little, once the family thing kicked in, there was very little a need for intimacy or attention that way, except around sex. It was strictly sex. They defined friendships and family in a much different way. To her, second, third generations and generations after her were extremely important because they had to work together to make that little compound that she lived in work. But they were pretty much independent. They didn't really do much with aunts, uncles, and cousins and things like that. So they had a great many differences. So while that's an extreme example, I think, as we get back into people that are all from the same country pretty much, and that may not be the case with so many immigrants coming in. We're going to find that when people talk about success, their definitions are going to be based on the beliefs that they had, based on the cultures that they come from. So I believe that this is one of the greatest challenges, and of course this life coaching course does some really good explanation and techniques around how to deal with that. First with NLP, which stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Neuro-Linguistic Programming, or NLP, is a school of thought that helps us to understand the way humans learn, form beliefs, and behave. And it was originated by John Grinder and Richard Bandler. Neuro stands for the brain, nerve cells, and the nervous system, the way that information moves around in the nerves. Linguistics is both verbal and nonverbal, okay, that moves through the neural pathways. And programming is the way that content is manipulated to convert it to useful information. Now it has a couple of premises. One is that the map is not the territory, and what that means is that it's impossible for a human being to fully grasp reality, to the complete understanding of it, and that the life and mind are systemic, that the life and mind are made up of the senses and the way that information moves around from different parts of the body into the brain and how it's processed, and that forms a system which kind of stands alone and by itself, and affects and is essentially the life and mind of the person. NLP has some presuppositions. One is communication is more than you are saying. Obviously, from the example of just John and Alima, there was so much that they would say in terms of words, but the communication itself was just completely different. They weren't getting it. No one is wrong or broken, and people work perfectly to accomplish what they are currently accomplishing. Whether they are accomplishing something that's helpful to them, to where they want to go or not, it is still doing so. It is still helping them. People already have all the resources they need is another. Every behavior is useful in some context. Even killing is useful in some context or other. The meaning of communication is the response you get. If you're getting a response you want or don't want, try something different. There's no such thing as failure, only feedback. Having choice is better than having no choice. In any system, the element with most flexibility exerts the most influence. The map is not the territory, which as I just did, and someone can do something, anyone can learn it. Right? It can be broken down into a paradigm that can be transferred to someone. And you cannot fail to communicate. And again, what you communicate may be not what you intend, but you will still communicate something as it goes forward. I think there was some, I thought personally some pretty profound things in what Dr. Weiser wrote in here. One is that NLP maximizes the number of choices that we have, and that excellence comes from that. Excellence comes from recognizing that you have the most choices, right? The more choices you have, the more excellent things can be. And also, another really, I think is immensely profound is wisdom comes from understanding different perspectives. All information that our brain uses to form a picture of the world comes in through our five senses. Okay, and this is called a representational system, because the senses receive the data, it's transmitted to the brain, which then goes and interprets that information and stores it somewhere. It's only a representation, it's not the actual thing. Our fingers touch the actual thing, or our eyes see the actual thing, but what gets to our brain is a representation of that. And there are three that are important to life coaching, are the VAC, the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. The kinesthetic is touch and feelings, and how they move around. The preferred, now everybody has a preferred representational system. We know some people are visually oriented, where they tend to think about things and solve problems with pictures in their minds, even in stuff that they create in their minds. And the same with some people are musical, or auditory, where they learn primarily or try to solve a lot of their problems with sounds, things that they hear. And there are people that do it through the kinesthetic way, where they use feelings to try to understand more of and express themselves and to solve problems. These representations that come in through the senses are modalities. And when those modalities come in, and they can be modified by our feelings, and these are called submodalities. Now, once we know how our feelings affect the representations that we make of the world, we can get closer to really understand what's happening, or what just happened, the event, or understand the communication. In some cases, people create representations or interpret representations or have behaviors which aren't useful in the given context. Now, every behavior is useful in some context. And so when those arise, when it isn't useful, it can be pre-framed, framed, or reframed. And basically, that means putting that behavior in the context in which it is useful. Working in, redescribing things, stepping back, taking a look at the situation, and applying the appropriate context to it is a useful way of helping someone through the coaching process. Two useful models that can be used to help understand a client's beliefs and the way that they communicate are the Milton and the Meta models. These models use linguistic patterns, questions, or statements that require the client to supply the definitions to common terms and words, so that you can understand what happy means, what family means. The conscious brain can only focus on a few things at any one time. So when problem solving or doing any kind of analysis, it's about seven items. Now, it's the meta programs that filter and sort the things to focus on, so that list gets filled with whatever programs are operating. Now, there are several kinds of programs that actually work in this. Ones are called the towards or away. That's where someone might define goals in terms of what they don't want. That's an away, as opposed to what they want, or a towards. They might have solve problems in terms of themselves, where they might decide that the quality of their work is good because they feel it's good. Or it might be other reference, where my work is good as my boss considers that it's good. And then there's the best case, worst case scenario. It's kind of self-explanatory. And big chunk, little chunk would deal with people that are maybe more detail-oriented or big picture-oriented. How they go. This is where metaphor is happening and symbolic modeling. Now, it's important for these meta programs to understand that no one program is necessarily bad or good. It's only appropriate. And the idea is to be able to use programs at will, to be able to use the toward when it's the right context to do that, and the same with the away. So the idea then is to have a choice as to which program that you want to use. The last thing that I want to talk about is the process of change. The process and change of change basically covers everything that we've just talked about. All of it can be used to move from a current state to some future state. It involves outcomes, being able to measure what what has happened with your while you're trying to change, when you're learning. It involves learning. It involves a relationship. It involves the senses and the representational systems. It involves emotional states. And all of these things contribute into the process of moving from that current state to the future state. One of the strategies that the course talked about was the TOTE strategy, the TOTE, which stands for test, operation, test, and exit. Basically, it's like a computer a decision loop in computer programming. You take the current, you test the current state of some variable or some object. You perform some computer operations on it, and then you test it again. If the second test returns the desired state, or the goal of the whole operation in the first place, then you exit and move on to the next operation. Personally, for me, I think life should always be changing. I mean, we should always be striving to change, and even changing the future state that we want. As we go through life, we learn things, we experience more things, and if we continue to learn and change, what we see and what we want in the future is also going to change. And so we need to be flexible. So I think for me, lifelong learning and constant change is part of it. And so the TOTE loop of testing, operations, and exit, for me, in the long run of my life, would never end. I hope that it continues to go where it just becomes an endless loop, where I take a look at myself, I'll continue to apply operations and set new goals, and hopefully never have to exit. But in the finite terms of life coaching, to be efficient, we're going to want to do the best job that we can of getting a good picture of the current state, then getting a good picture of what the future state should look like. And then if we do a good job at designing the operations and carrying out those operations, when we do the test at the end, we should have achieved the goals. We should have arrived at the current state, and then we can exit. So again, I'd like to say thank you very much for this opportunity. I enjoyed the course very much, and thank you very much.